Welcome to day 2 of the Art Symposium 2019. Co-presented by the HKAGA and the Asia Society Hong Kong Center for the 4th consecutive year and held as part of the Hong Kong Art Week 2019. I'm Willem Molesworth, Director of Desart Gallery and Vice President of the Hong Kong Art Gallery Association. I program the yearly symposium with Fabio Rossi, the co-president, and am hugely thankful to him for helping put this together. I'm also, along with my wife Isabel Chung, the co-founder of Suitcase Institute, which is a traveling platform for the itinerant exhibition of art in any space or location. The theme of the symposium this year is Back to Basics, Restructuring the Future. And as we return to the fundamentals and rethink strategies in creating a sustainable community for today's art world. Our program addresses topics such as cultural development and art criticism in Hong Kong, while exploring prospective alternative forms of art collecting and gallery operations beyond our current era. As the symposium puts forth an opportunity to reimagine the future in an increasingly diverse and complex art world, our 4 panels and keynote speech also touch on vital pillars within our industry, highlighting issues and positing solutions. A little introduction to the symposium structure before we begin. In each panel session, 30 minutes will be dedicated to the main speaker, who will give a presentation on the session topic, after which a 1-hour discussion coordinated by a moderator will begin. There will be a Q&A session at the end of each panel discussion. For those who were not here yesterday, we were very honored to have invited renowned local and international art professionals to conduct 2 extremely engaging and thought-provoking sessions about Hong Kong's position as an art market versus cultural center, and existing and potential alternative models to traditional gallery operations. Today, there will be a screening of an award-winning documentary, Urban Dorothy, at 12 p.m., at which sandwiches and juices will be offered by 12 noon. I strongly recommend everyone to stay and watch this amazing documentary about how a postal clerk and a librarian in the United States managed to build one of the most important contemporary art collections in history with very modest means. Concluding our day will be a keynote speech delivered by Zuhania Rafael, Museum Director of M+, who will shed light on plans for the museum, which is posed to be unveiled soon. You can find the detailed program of the Art Symposium and speakers' information in the booklet, which is distributed at the back of the hall. Feel free to reach out to the HKAGA team on site if you'd like to find out more about our regular program and upcoming events. Without further ado, let's begin day 2 of the Art Symposium in session 3, which is Your Show Sucks. Why does art criticism matter? The panel will take a look at art criticism, its history, present, and its future, with a special focus on Hong Kong. It will explore the relationship between criticism and critical voice, considering the role that both play within the art ecology. The main speaker of this panel is Emily Verla-Bovino, Professor of Art and Architectural History at SCAD Hong Kong. After receiving her doctoral degree from the University of California, San Diego in art history, theory, and criticism with a concentration in art practice, Emily has been working as an educator and researcher in Hong Kong. Her art writing has been published in various academic journals, international art magazines, museum catalogs, and artist publications. Her current research focuses on the past and present of art criticism in the city, which of course makes her the perfect candidate to lead this panel. After her presentation, Emily will be joined by the moderator H.G. Masters, Deputy Editor and Deputy Publisher of Art Asia Pacific magazine, who will introduce the rest of panel 3 on stage for the discussion. H.G. has written catalog essays about artists and was awarded the Creative Capital One Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant for short-form writing. On that note, I'd like to invite the main speaker of session 3, Emily Verla-Bovino, to kick off today's first session. Emily.
Hello there, everyone. Great to see so many people out today for our panel. I'd actually like to start by thanking the Hong Kong Art Week organizer, Fabio Rossi of Rossi & Rossi, and Willem Molesworth of Desart for the symposium organizing, and our moderator, H.G. Masters from Art Asia Pacific, for inviting me to give this talk to begin our panel on art criticism today. I'm honored to present some of the observations that I've made about art criticism as it is being practiced in our city. And I'd like you to keep in mind, however, that these are observations that I've made over the past 2 years since I've been back in Hong Kong. I grew up here between 1984 and 1991, but only just returned in 2018 with the faculty position in art and architectural history that I currently hold at SCAD Hong Kong. It's also important to keep in mind that I lost most of my Chinese language education when I returned to the US, unfortunately. So though I do try to work my way through some of our Hong Kong-based Chinese language criticism with great difficulty, my observations are mostly based on writings in English or that have been translated into English. So this is, of course, a limit to my observations, right? But what I definitely do is I work with the writings of other colleagues. So I try to be a witness to what others are writing, right? And bring some of that together for you also here today. And I'm also working on trying to remedy this, but obviously that's a very long-term project. You should also know that I actually come to art history and art criticism through my practice as an artist, trained in urbanism through the field of cultural studies. So while I'm not going to discuss my own experiments, integrating my practice as an artist with my activities as a scholar, researcher, and art writer, I think it's nonetheless important that you understand my own very particular perspective, which of course conditions what I've decided to focus on in my talk today. Over the past 2 years, since I returned to Hong Kong after a 27-year absence, I've observed art criticism in the city being practiced to resist the very voice of coercive authority that our title, Your Show Sucks, represents. I didn't come up with this title, but I understand it was only proposed half seriously as a way to generate audience interest. But while I don't think that it tells us much about why art criticism matters, it does reflect something about our expectations of art criticism. Reflecting on these expectations can help us to better see art criticism more specifically for how it's actually being practiced in Hong Kong. So we are going to explore the relationship between criticism and critical voice in the city and the role that both play within the city's art ecology. Not being exactly sure what kind of audience to expect here today, I thought it was important that we all share a basic understanding of what art criticism, as it is conventionally understood, is, what it does, how it is written. Art criticism, as it is currently practiced in Hong Kong and English, generally engages various levels of analysis. Formal analysis, which focuses on describing the formal qualities and material aspects of a work, and contextual analysis, which looks at questions like subject matter, where a work was made, where it was shown, the relationship it has to other artworks of its own moment and of the past, what the artist says or writes about the intent behind it, and so on. In other words, everything outside of the work itself that impacts the work's life in the world. Conceptual analysis comes from thinking through formal and contextual analysis. Through conceptual analysis, concepts are drawn from an encounter with contemporary art and taken out into the world to reflect on our broader experience. There is a debate about the use of critical theory to understand art, since some critics write through artworks to illustrate concepts from important philosophers. Instead, the object-based hermeneutic approach to criticism draws concepts from encounters with art. It sees material and formal aspects of the work as the means through which the concepts come to exist, and sees criticism as a means to the artwork's realization. There is also a debate about too much formal analysis and description dominating art writing, and a debate about the role of judgment. Due to the debate about judgment, many have shifted to identifying themselves as art writers rather than as art critics. And they do this to question the common sense understanding of what judgment is and what judgment does. There are some who would argue that a writer willing to proclaim "your show sucks" is holding on to judgment. Others believe that this kind of critique is at best obsolete, at worst the remnant of cultural imperialism, part of a model of criticism no longer relevant when we conceive of the art system in ecological terms, that is, founded in a kind of mutuality or sharing of a common world, rather than as a mere cycle of production and consumption. This issue actually came up at the most recent Whitney Biennial in New York, lauded as the city's most diverse, when some white writers who judged the show as not radical enough were criticized for not having done the work to develop the analytical and conceptual tools to think about works by Indigenous, Black, and queer practitioners. Judgment as attentive conceptual analysis, the ability to draw concepts from encounters with art, rather than judgment as connoisseurship, making qualitative statements about work being good or bad, appears to be the priority for most art criticism in Hong Kong. These are different conceptions of judgment, not the choice between judging or not judging. Reflecting on this debate in 2014, the panel chair of an important program at Asia Art Archive, poet, writer, and cultural critic Tang Siwa, explained written critiques and reviews provide more than just descriptive and evaluative components for artworks and art events. They expand the domain of art and become a means of connecting it to wider audiences. The Art Appraisal Club echo this concern for expanding the domain of art in their writing about art criticism, which they insist should broaden the space for art criticism in Hong Kong, encouraging more discussions on the developments in art. The Hong Kong Critics Collective, started by curator Ying Kwok, this is Art Appraisal Club, and including artist and critic Anthony Leung Po Shan, curator and writer Yang Yung, curator Vivian Ting, artist-curator Jeff Leung, and artist-critic Chan Sai-lok, seems to assert here that judgment needs to undergo a process of decolonization, of being redefined for Hong Kong's specificity, of becoming more inclusive and expanded, more expansive. The mission of Hong Kong arts organization Sound Pocket, founded by art appraisal member Yang Yung, is representative of this effort to expand art criticism. It's also emblematic of resistance to the voice of coercive authority that's represented by the your show sucks notion of what art criticism should do. Sound Pocket is not a sound art organization, though it does promote sound art in Hong Kong and explores how Hong Kong artists work with sound. Rather, it aims more broadly to help us learn the value of listening. In addition to her art writing and expanded practice of curating, teaching, publishing, hosting, and participating in conversations, as well as posting to social media, Young's art organization Sound Pocket is itself a critical gesture, opposing a crisis mode, opinion-based criticism of intimidation with a listening open ear aimed at some level of enlightened sharing. In fact, Sharing What I Am Still Learning was the title that Young chose for a series of impromptu dialogues she held at Dai Kwun with artist Tang Kwa Kim. So this isn't to say that art criticism in Hong Kong does not see value in conflict and tension. It does indeed. But what kind of conflict and what kind of tension is, I think, the critical question. Art is not a contest of defeating others, Young posts in writing on the back of a receipt captured in her Facebook profile, but in not being defeated by yourself. Those practicing art criticism in our city definitely seem to aim to get beyond the notion that the artist and art critic are bringing knowledge to an ignorant viewer who needs to be educated. Concern about art criticism's role in an art ecology is different from concern about its role in an art market. The art market is a system that functions on a cycle of production and consumption. With an art ecology, on the other hand, we are looking at not a simple cycle of consumption, but life itself, cycling into the creation of new social and cultural realities. Our concern is for the relationships between humans, organism, objects, and their environment, and the nature of these relationships themselves as they take shape in and through art. For a better understanding of what art criticism does, drawing concepts out of works, rather than imposing concepts on them, let's read through an example together. In Hong Kong-based art writer Hera Chan's Art Forum Critics Pick of the just recently deinstalled exhibition Café do Brasil at Quarry Bay's Parasite, one of Hong Kong's most important contemporary art centers, founded initially as a self-generated, artist-run collaborative initiative. The writer pulls the concept of rehearsal from formal and contextual analysis. The review begins with social context. The important hangout space Café do Brasil in Tsim Sha Tsui, which in the memory of Hong Kong artists and intellectuals was the site for exploration of radical social thought and politics in the 1960s and 1970s. It continues with art historical context. The important Hong Kong-based Parasite Group's exhibition Coffee Shop in 1998, which merged performance, installation, and hospitality in a cafe environment, which at the time challenged preconceptions about where art should be seen and how art should be made. It then transitions quickly to formal analysis, discussing the fluid and informal form that curator Chu Chang gave to the exhibition space where the show was on view. She restaged Parasite's coffee shop in an actual street-level cafe. And the interior architecture of the 22nd floor space, the second part of the exhibition, welcomed gatherings while acting to support a selection of works that all seemed self-consciously conceived as parts that could dwell together, rather than as objects that would aim to set themselves apart. The show was an occasion to think about the concept of rehearsal, specifically, quote, a rehearsal space for being together, unquote, as Chan writes with direct reference to the past 6 months of protests. Contextual analysis threads through formal analysis into conceptual analysis, and we take the concept of rehearsal from the show with us outside to look at the world around us. So my third point about art criticism in Hong Kong: what does art criticism do, and why does it matter? Criticism facilitates art's ability to change the way we think and organize ourselves. Encounters with art provide us with new ways to experience the world around us. They change the way we think, the way we organize ourselves, and the way we are together, making us more aware of ourselves so we can create new modes of sociality together. Let's move on from what art criticism is, how it is written, and what it does, into the art history of Hong Kong art criticism. How does the specific history of art criticism in Hong Kong, how do we recount it? How we situate it is important. As part of the project Museum 97, Oscar Ho, who's one of Hong Kong's most important cultural critics, invited writers, public intellectuals, other artists, and the general public to develop a new founding myth for Hong Kong history that would upset the classic fishing village to megacity textbook narrative. In their origin story, Hong Kong's beginnings are traced instead to the 10th century, when the earliest known written reference to an event in Hong Kong is dated. In their critical narrative, the main character is a mermaid, half human, half fish, called Lo Ting, who Ho and his collaborators propose is the ancestor of Hong Kongers. As writes CNG Art Partment founder, artist Clara Chung, among the 4 artist candidates who won seats in last weekend's district council elections, the Lo Ting project is an important critical gesture that reminds us that we give shape to the future through our present by means of the narratives that we choose to recount about our past. Poet and art writer Tang Siu-Hua identifies the 1990s, the decade leading up to the transfer of sovereignty over Hong Kong from Britain to China, known as the handover, as the foundational decade for art criticism in Hong Kong, due to intensifying discussions about Hong Kong identity and the role of the artist in society. Indeed, this is the moment when we see the beginning of the publication PS, created by the Parasite Group, credited by some with being Hong Kong's first visual arts magazine, as the current Parasite Contemporary Arts Center recounts, quote, a central platform for the development of art writing and of a discursive scene in the city. Writing on experimental theater group Zuni Icosahedron, scholars Clayton McKenzie and Moira Arthurs write about the vitality of critical gestures and performance during the period that immediately preceded the handover. However, they also bring attention to Hong Kong Arts Center's arts directors having to submit the scripts of their performances to the local police for censorship under the Public Performance Ordinance when the city was still under British colonial rule. They claim this requirement ended in 1995 when the ordinance was revoked because it contrasted with the notion of individual freedom outlined in the Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance, which asserts, quote, no one shall be subject to coercion which would impair freedom to have or to adopt a belief of choice, unquote. Since 1995 saw the creation of the Hong Kong Arts Development Council, identifying the 1990s as the height of art criticism might actually have the effect of drawing our attention away from the manner in which civil society mobilized to generate its own initiatives and activities in art criticism long before gaining government support in the lead up to the handover. Hong Kong artist critic Linda Lai writes about filmmaking as an important form of critical writing in the city. Thus, the founding of the Phoenix Cineclub between 1971 and 1973 by Mei Feng, Freddie Wong Kwok Soo, and others, and the critical writing through editing, also practiced by the arts group Videotage, founded in 1986 by Mei Feng, Ellen Pao, Wong Chi-fai, and Ko Min Mo, could also be considered equally fundamental to the development of art criticism in Hong Kong. Indeed, researcher Michelle Wong has written that Hong Kong artist Ha Bik-chuan's art history of images through photographs and collage books, which archivists are still sorting through, is currently helping us to better understand the place of critical image making, including photographic archives, scrapbooks, and collage in the writing of Hong Kong art history. I would argue that this kind of critical image making is equally important for the history of art criticism, not just Hong Kong art history. So my fourth observation about art criticism in Hong Kong is that it's being practiced as an expanded field that includes writing, but also expands our understanding of what writing is, of what art criticism is, what form it takes, and what it does, into critical image making as well. In a colonial context, where there is a complicated relationship to critical voice, image-making practices are an important part of art criticism's history. The groundwork for art criticism pre-existed public and private funding for the arts that permitted for more publications, spaces, and platforms in the 1990s. As our arts infrastructure continues to develop in Hong Kong, we must insist on anchoring our narratives about the history of art and art criticism in the self-generated initiatives of Hong Kong. Archive of the People's Li Kai-chung asserted as much in the brief art history of Hong Kong he introduced at a discussion he moderated on groups and collectives at Parasite in September. In this narrative, groups of artists looking at each other's work and critiquing each other's work is what gave rise to Hong Kong's art ecology. Art as a form of self-critique and of being together was at the foundations of Hong Kong art history. In preparation for my talk, I asked our panelists to send me at least 2 examples that immediately came to mind when they think about what the brief we were given called a critical voice within the art ecology in Hong Kong. HG, our mediator, gave a list that I thought it would be helpful for me to share with you today, identifying the 3 traditional Hong Kong positions in art criticism through the iconic John Batten, a British expatriate longtime resident in Hong Kong whose writings can be found in Ming Pao Weekly and South China Morning Post, senior culture writer Enid Choi, who writes about the art market and the city's cultural development for the South China Morning Post, and Anthony Lung Po Shan, performance artist, original member of Parasite, now member of Art Appraisal Club. Abstracted as critical positions, these three practitioners are the committed expatriate art critic, the bicultural newspaper critic, and the local critic practitioner, respectively. I would expand this map of positions to include first the group, collective, and association, since this position has already shown itself to be foundational to art history and art criticism in Hong Kong, and continues, I think, to define the field. Second, the mainland-born, Hong Kong-raised or based practitioners like Tang Xiuhua. And third, what I've heard curator-writer Ingrid Chu call the reverse migrant, referring to scholar Yuk-Hwa Chan's studies of Chinese migration, or rather those born in Hong Kong or with parents from Hong Kong who left, grew up elsewhere, and have recently returned. Let's go back to the example of published art criticism I used to illustrate for you how art criticism in the usual art magazines of reference works. I chose an example of writing from a New York-based publication, Art Forum, by a Hong Kong diaspora writer, Hera Chan, another reverse migrant, raised in New York and Canada, now based in Hong Kong, in order to foreground recent changes in Hong Kong's art ecology, spurred by the complex entanglement of three forces: reverse migration, the creation of new institutions in the city like Tai Kwun and M+, and Hong Kong becoming the third largest market for art in the world. With the rise of Hong Kong's market status, international art magazines are increasingly interested in reporting on the Hong Kong art scene. Hong Kong writers like Chan are doing really important tactical maneuvering through this opening, using it to promote discussion about otherwise underreported Hong Kong exhibitions and artists. In her writing on the art market for South China Morning Post, Enid Choi brings attention to Parasite's Anthony Leung Po-shan, who by now you should know is one of Hong Kong's most important critics, and her suspicions about the way Art Basel is changing Hong Kong's art ecology. In their important essay lamenting the lack of support for art criticism in Hong Kong, the Art Appraisal Club, the Hong Kong Critics Collective that includes Leung, identify a lack of in-depth discussions on art, noting that most writing packages art exhibitions and events as spectacles and forms of entertainment to be consumed. The suggestion is that stimulating us to think about how we see, rather than just titillating us visually and inspiring us to consume, is the role art criticism should aim for in an art ecology like Hong Kong's, so based as it has been on art as a means for self-critique and developing new ways of being together. As Enid notes, Hong Kong is often unfairly labeled as a cultural desert, with Art Basel doing the city the favor of putting Hong Kong on the map. But the city also runs the risk of being inaccurately portrayed as suffering from a lack or paucity of art criticism before the arrival of government funding and the big international art magazines if we don't tell art criticism's history carefully. In her short list of Hong Kong art criticism for Asia Art Archive, Tang Xiuhua asserts the importance of the Hong Kong Arts Center publication Through the Transition and Over the Millennium, self-selected visual art criticism essays by 7 critics, published in 2002. Tang explains that this volume explicitly expresses the focus of art criticism in Hong Kong as efforts to, quote, shaping and articulating a public civic society. In his 2018 book, Hong Kong Soft Power, focused on the Hong Kong art ecology between 2005 and 2014, Hong Kong art historian Frank Vigneron maps out art criticism in Hong Kong in a similar fashion, but via periodicals. Interestingly, however, he begins with artist Wilson Xie's work on Hong Kong Visual Art Audience Chart, which does not even name art criticism, but only implies its presence among art writers and art professionals in what he calls the, quote, hardcore audience for Hong Kong visual art, also potentially invoking art criticism among the mass media in the bottom right of the chart, where he lists, quote, exhibition info and interviews, news and auction records. Are we even seeing art criticism in Hong Kong? I'll return to this in a second. The publications that Vigneron focuses on are Pipeline, Art Plus, and AM Post, the Hong Kong version of the Chinese language art newspaper, the journal Yishu, and Chinese University of Hong Kong's Hong Kong Visual Arts Yearbook, and Asia Art Archive's Field Notes, now an online publication. Both Tang Xiuhua's A Four-Sided Shortlist and the work by Michelle Wong on Oscar Ho and Ha Bicchuan, previously discussed, come from this platform. Vigneron also mentions the International Association of Art Critics, Hong Kong, AICA, whose website circulates the work, including translations, of some of its most high-profile members, including John Batten, Anthony Leung Po Shan, and Yang Yung. To these, I would add Art Asia Pacific, headquartered in Hong Kong since 2011, and illustrating how major publications can, illustrating how major publications can actually spawn smaller ones. So I'd like to mention as well the AAP Hong Kong editor Karen Chung as the founding editor of Still Loud, an independent magazine about the city's music scene. The online platform Ocula gives significant space to writers to develop ideas about Hong Kong's specific practices and publishes Ocula Conversations each year, an important reference for writing through dialogue with artists. There is also Art Appraisal Club's Art Review, though only intermittently published, and Yang Yung's Facebook page, a consistent source of deep reflections. The bilingual magazine Randian, launched in Shanghai, provides an English-translated forum for occasional intellectual exchange between China and Hong Kong. And both Hong Kong-based Artomedy, launched in 2016, and Chobo Social, conceived as a community platform for collectors, have featured contributions by Leung Po Shan and Yang Yung. The recent Creative Cultures Conference of the new Hong Kong Studies Journal featured several art criticism-based contributions. Art criticism is being practiced as an expanded field with a deep connection to the past 60 years of the city's art history. Art platforms must respond to this. Are they? Art criticism as an expanded field is not only art criticism being practiced in many publications in different ways, or through working groups, collectives, and associations. In Linda Lai's work and Ha Bicchuan's archives, we also see art criticism reconceived both with and beyond writing through critical image making. As found in the projects of Hong Kong's historically important artist groups like Videotage. And also, I'd like to say AAP has actually perhaps tried to recognize this, supporting photo editor Esther Chan's Parallel Worlds image blog. We can also see the legacy of this in the Hong Kong Artists Union, which just got an important Hong Kong arts institution to agree to provide health insurance to artists while their work is being shown. The Artist Book Library, the Booked Art Book Fair, and Investigations in Art Publishing Project at Dai Kwun. Display Distribute, the distribution service and sometimes Kowloon exhibition space and shop for self-publishing, conceived by artist researcher Elaine Ho and artist writer Ming Lin. Are laments over a paucity of art criticism in Hong Kong more reflections of our own inability to give value to the active critical practices that surround us, to name them as such, and to support them? I want to conclude with two further points, one about the issue of readership and one about criticism and fiction. Some take the position that the most pressing issue confronting art criticism is lack of engaged readership. And indeed, an important part of art criticism as expanded field is expanding art criticism to reach a public that does not yet exist, giving form to this public, creating it. Indeed, quote, "Reading Together" was the subtitle to Yang Yung's Sharing What I Am Still Learning project at Dai Kwun with Tang Kwa Kin. For a concluding example, let's return to the ever-important Leung Po Shan, among our most important critics in Hong Kong. As part of Asia Art Archive's initiative Memory Acts, which has artists revisit archives, Leung reenacted a gesture by Pun Sing Loi, the mainland-trained artist who arrived in Hong Kong in 1992. In 1996, he gained renown in local newspapers for throwing red paint on the late 19th century bronze sculpture of Queen Victoria, also hammering her nose, a critical gesture against the monumental public art of British imperialism. The artist also covered himself in red paint and stayed on site to be arrested, then taken to Eastern Hospital for psychiatric observation. Leung revisited this incident by reenacting it, dressing herself in red slippers, a red dress, and finally a red clothespin to pinch her nose. In the process, she read reports of the incident in Cantonese, Mandarin, and English from local newspapers. She then told the story of her own missed encounter with this gesture, which she said she passed on a bus on her way to the offices of the Economic Journal where she was working at the time, just missing being an actual witness, though technically physically present on the scene. The complex critical gesture, combining reading, reenacting, reinterpreting, and critically recounting, became its own critical writing of sorts, inscribed ironically into the site where it was staged, questioned as a new site of a kind of cultural imperialism, Hong Kong's Art Basel. The slippers, dress, and clothespin became a sale lot in a mock auction won by a reviewer of the artist critic's new book, the ironically titled I Love Art Basel. Not just a mere promotional ploy, though playing at being such, this approach to art criticism as an expanded field created a kind of engagement that literally read to us, with us, as part of a performative approach to making a community of future readers. I could offer many other models of art criticism as expanded field, talking to you more about the important foundational work of Linda Lai and her practice with floating projects, and Oscar Ho with his Hong Kong Lo Ting Research Association, or the model of critical art practitioners like Mei Feng and Clara Chung creating actual spaces for art criticism like Art and Culture Outreach and C&G Art Apartment. Or Tang Kuo-kin creating opportunities for intimate gatherings with strangers in his home. Vicky Do of Archive of the People reflecting just last weekend on the tactical use of media within and outside of what she calls the art ecosystem. Artist Yim Soifeng, co-founder of the artist-run Rooftop Institute and her history of Oil Street Depot, now a significant place for the Hong Kong arts community, told through the life of her father, who used to work in the area as a watchman at the depot. Since she works in this realm, Yim's practice brings me to my final point about art criticism and fiction. My own primary interest as an artist, writer, and art historian, a practitioner of critical fiction, interested in ficto-criticism and artist novels. Art criticism matters also as a visionary activity. Are we giving it the space and opportunity to develop as such? Or are we forcing it to fit formulas we feel comfortable with so that art is more easily consumed as commodity rather than an activity that challenges thinking and being? Art criticism as visionary activity is capable of getting us to imagine other presents, but it also matters as a record, capable of communicating with a future that we will never meet. We make critical gestures for each other, sure, but also to connect to those, to connect those long gone with those not yet living, whose lives have never and will never cross our own. Practicing art criticism with words, gestures, and objects while writing and reading together, our expanded field of art criticism in Hong Kong matters, not because it grants us the coercive authority to say your show sucks, but because it is visionary witnessing. So as gallerists and as collectors, you should ask yourselves, how are you supporting art criticism, as in critical writing, indeed? But you should also ask yourselves, how are you nurturing critical voice and developing critical approaches in your own practice? Whether that be through devising new ways to support artists or developing new approaches to collections that are less about possession and ownership than about sharing and custodianship, devising new forms for support for writers. As visionary witnessing, art criticism is a means to support the present, but it is also an offering to the future. Thank you.